for you guys. So before we get into our normal show, we've got an incredible guest. And again, if you're out there listening in, you need to go over to our discussion page, facebook.com/groups/Warfighter Eye, and be a part of this discussion, because this is major for our community. And one of the major things that we all deal with, or that so many of us deal with, is post-traumatic stress and TBI. And so many folks get stuck in the over medication, having trouble getting effective treatments, whether it's through the VA or private care. And a lot of talk's been popping up lately about the possibilities in alternative therapies. And there's one that I'm very excited about, and that is hyperbaric oxygenation therapy. And we've got Gordon Brown joining us. So let's go to the phones and welcome this guest, because I'm so excited to have him on with us today. Gordon, are you with us?
Absolutely.
How you doing today, sir?
All right. Very excited to be on your show and get some information out there to our brothers and sisters about hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
Absolutely, man. And I actually talked about this on the show a couple weeks ago. A random story had popped up on one of the news sources about it, and I just so excited to have somebody who's been there, done that, come on and share with us your experiences and everything. So before we dive into everything, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about you and what you're working on and how all that's going.
All right. I was in the U.S. Navy from 72 to 80, and I made E6 in about 5.5 years. When I was at sea, I was the leading petty officer aboard Oriskany and Ranger, running the engine rooms. I ran the aft engine room on Oriskany when we were in the Tonkin Gulf up at Yankee Station during Vietnam, and then Ranger. And then I was transferred to Guam, where I was involved with several government agencies. And there was actually a movie called The Guamanian Heroin Wars of 76 to 78. I was involved in that little operation. Then I was transferred to Naval Drug Rehabilitation Center, where I was one of the senior counselors, suicide prevention officer, and the military liaison officer for Narcotics Anonymous. So I've been around both sides of the drug issue, both law enforcement and then rehabilitation. And I've also been around a lot of suicides. And that is one of the reasons why I got so heavily involved in hyperbaric. But I left in 80. 3 months later, I was a merchant marine engineering officer and also had a JG commission in the Naval Reserves. I left as a lieutenant commander, but I never retired, so I was a Mustang officer. And that's my history. Now I'm involved in a small medical supply company, and my real passion, my need for a legacy is Team Veteran, and that's creating sustainable funding to be able to treat our brothers and sisters without having to rely on the VA approving the treatment or even acknowledging that we may have suffered an injury. Every veteran has to go into their medical record to prove what isn't there. You as a Army medic, and corpsmen, they don't place a lot of things in our medical record. Yet we have to use the medical record to prove what they know isn't there.
You're absolutely right. And, it's, just to touch on that just real briefly here, it is difficult for Army medics, corpsmen, the whole deal, to have every little thing spelled out the way the VA and other entities want to see that. We document the injuries and the treatments, but if it's not worded exactly the way they want to see it, or they don't understand how it was worded, they can just absolutely discredit it. So you're absolutely right on that fact.
And I was exposed to Agent Orange in the water in the Tonkin, asbestos in the engine rooms, TCE, carbon tet. Yet the only thing in my record is asbestos, and yet the VA doesn't even acknowledge asbestos. There's no registry for us. So it draws me closer and closer to looking at alternative treatments, integrative medicine, that can truly help the veterans. So we want to dive right into hyperbaric and what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, what we're talking about today, folks, is a really exciting alternative treatment for things like post-traumatic stress and TBI. And, every time that we talk alternative treatments, I want to make a blanket statement here that every kind of treatment has, different benefits, and, what works for one person, it doesn't work for another. So it doesn't discredit the medications and, psychotherapy and things like that. But for some folks, those things aren't effective, or they're so overused that it's doing more damage than good. Would you agree with that, Gordon?
Absolutely. The protocol at the VA for treating PTS and TBI is the use of psychotropic drugs. Mm-hmm. And these drugs are a blood-brain element. They cross the blood-brain barrier. And so it affects many aspects of your body, and along with the fact that you also have to have blood tests when you're on these drugs, because they're looking for signs that it's causing liver, kidney, thyroid, and heart damage. Mm-hmm. So if you're on these medications for a long period of time, you've just destroyed your quality of life and maybe your longevity. So if we can look at something that is natural, like oxygen. Now, I know you're a diver. I used to be a master diver. So those in the scuba diving arena are very familiar with what's called the chamber. Everybody knows about a chamber, because if you make a mistake while you're scuba diving, you could end up with a bends, and you're going to be in that chamber for 4, 6, 10 hours as they decompress you. So, and try to get the bubbles back into your blood system of nitrogen. So if you take the chamber, which is a cylindrical tube, and maybe there are many different sizes of them, but the one I was in is about 14 feet long, maybe 7 foot tall. I could stand up in it. I'm 6'4". And you're pressurized between 1.5 ATA and 2.2. So what that means is you're below the surface anywhere from 18 to 40 feet. That's all it is. It's like taking a dive to 40 feet at 2.2 atmospheres, and you're under pressure. While you're in there, you're breathing 100% medical grade oxygen. And what happens is that the oxygen molecules actually go deep inside the plasma of the blood. They get into the bone marrow. They are massive amounts of oxygen throughout your bloodstream, which also activates additional capillary growth. So now you've got additional blood going to damaged and traumatized areas. If neurons in your brain from a traumatic brain injury haven't been killed but are merely sleeping because of hypoxia, they just don't have enough oxygen to wake up. Mm-hmm. This wakes them up. And they've done a tremendous amount of research in this. Israel has been using hyperbaric for over 4 decades. They use it with the IDF soldiers. Anytime they're in a concussive or a shockwave incident, they're sent to the chambers. And when I've talked to a lot of Israeli soldiers and also doctors there, PTS is virtually unheard of in Israel. Because if you heal the brain, if the brain is functioning, psychotherapy becomes a very, very solid tool in your arsenal. But if the brain is damaged and you have frontal lobe damage, which is a very common portion of the brain that's damaged, in my case, the upper right quadrant was entirely blood. It was all white on the MRI. I'd had a venous subdural hematoma. Went on for probably 2 months, what we figured. I had emergency brain surgery, and after post-op, I had 2 grand mal seizures, which caused me to cross over twice. Fortunately, not the third time. So for 13 and a half years, I've been living with a traumatic brain injury, along with PTS from my Guam days. So when I started investigating different things that might help, and I looked at hyperbaric and the fact that it's being used extensively for traumatic brain injuries, I got heavily involved in it. I started sponsoring a number of vets. Probably the most famous one is a staff sergeant. He was a recon Marine. He was drowned at Camp Pendleton in 2009. And Sergeant Carey is now able to walk with slight assistance. He's beginning to get vision back. He's beginning to see colors and shadows now when he was completely blind before. There's tremendous advances with this individual. So I was very proud to have sponsored him for his first 40 dives. And since then, he's had 80 or additional 40 dives. And it's amazing when you're looking at somebody that was pretty much classified as a vegetable. They weren't going to be able to do much in their life. And now he's able to start enjoying his daughter and being active in his life again. Now, that's just one example of many. If you go to Oxygen Instead of Medication Facebook page, there are a number of different stories there that will get you to understand the potential of hyperbaric oxygen therapy for these two issues. And there are a number of other things that they're looking into. MS, Parkinson's disease. It's used extensively for diabetics and any type of ulcerations.
Yeah, and before we get into the post-traumatic stress and TBI side of the things, I just want to break this down for our listeners out there from a medical angle. You mentioned divers having to go through this a lot. It's been used for years and years for treating the decompression sickness, and that alone is extremely painful. It can be quickly fatal, and the hyperbaric therapy almost always can absolutely reverse it. It's just incredible to see the process happen. And we had some folks asking on the chat thread there if this was what the athletes do when they talk about blood doping. And this isn't that. The blood doping is actually using adding platelets and plasma and stuff and re-injecting that blood back into the body. The hyperbaric treatments are essentially exactly what he's saying here. You're put in a chamber. There's no really better way to describe it other than a chamber. And they raise the pressure inside that vessel. So like you said, it's the same thing as diving down. When you're swimming, the deeper you get, you have more pressure on your body. It simulates that, and you're just surrounded by 100% medical grade oxygen under pressure. And that's what actually gets it to go into the body. That's a pretty good explanation, right?
Yes, absolutely. And there are two types of chambers. There's a monoplace where it's just one individual who goes into a tube. It's pretty much a gurney attached to the tube. They pull it out, patient gets on it, and they slide it in, close the chamber door, and begin the pressurization. When we talk about pressurization, if you can fly, you can go in a hyperbaric chamber.
Right.
It's nothing more than the feeling that you might have when you're going into a higher elevation. You have to pinch your nose and blow out gently. It's the same thing that we divers do as we keep going deeper and deeper. We keep repressurizing. And so it's the one thing that a lot of veterans will notice is a lot of us have been in situations where we can get claustrophobic very quickly. And I had several situations when I was in the Navy where that came about, and I was trapped in some areas, and I thought that was going to be an issue for me as I got into the chamber. But because at the facility I went to that I was sponsored to go through, there's a technician in the chamber with you. So it relieves a lot of those fears and anxieties. I was able to go over that, cross that hurdle almost immediately. There were a couple times where I felt it coming on again, and I just realized you're not going to get hurt in here. There's no problem. Nobody's going to let you get hurt. And so I have an entire journal of my 40 dives that I did. It's on my webpage. I think there's a link on your blog that you're doing right now. Mm-hmm. Go take a look at it. At least get an idea of what it's like to be inside the chamber. And the other thing that I haven't mentioned yet